deal. It's just it's baffling.
A serving Metropolitan Police officer has been charged with rape. Sergeant Leo Boateng, who has been suspended, is due to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court later. He was off duty at the time of the alleged offence. Ofsted has promised to do everything to prevent further deaths following the suicide of head teacher Ruth Perry. She took her own life after her primary school in Berkshire was downgraded last year. The proposals include new guidelines showing school leaders how to pause an inspection if teachers show signs of distress. Transport for London fares are to be frozen until March next year. It will apply to pay-as-you-go prices for bus, tube, DLR and tram journeys, as well as most on the Overground and Elizabeth line. And the Mayor Sadiq Khan will be taking your calls with James after the news. In the city, the FTSE 100 a short time ago was trading down 42 points at 75.02. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.16. LBC weather, cold and dry with sunny spells for most places, cloud and snow across much of Scotland, a high of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Thomas Watts.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. The Mayor of London is here, equipped with all the latest technology, which means that he'll be able to introduce the calls himself. And in fact, I won't. Yes, I will. So I'll put him in charge of that shortly. But I need to begin with something that I don't really like talking about. I have a rule. I don't know if you've ever picked up on this. The only time we discuss motoring issues on this programme is when you're here.
Okay.
I try to sort of swim against the tide of radio phone-in traditions when you can fill hours with talk of potholes and parking tickets and the rest of it. And of course, latterly, ULEZ. But as someone who travels almost exclusively by public transport, I can't get anywhere at the moment. I really can't get anywhere. The roads across the entire capital, to be specific, and this is why I don't really like it as a subject, but if you're trying to get to the station at Boston Manor or Northfields at the moment, the bus stop's about half a mile away from the station because of all the roadworks. If you're coming from Brentford into central London, it's like there's more chicanes than there are at Brands Hatch. What is going on, and how much of it is your fault?
So the way it works is, good morning, James, is
Good morning.
The utility companies for TfL roads pay a lane rental charge. And so for TfL roads, and just a reminder, only 5% of roads in the city, 5% are TfL controlled. So we are very good at coordinating.
And the rest are controlled by the local council.
Exactly.
So you have responsibility for 5% of London roads, right?
Correct. So we coordinate. So, for example, if you're the gas company wants to dig up roads, we'll say, by the way, before you do, does the electricity company want to dig up roads? Does the 4G, 5G company want to dig up roads? And we coordinate so there's only one digging up of roads that doesn't cause you inconvenience, and we charge for each day that roads dug up. What we're trying to do is to have a similar scheme for council roads, coordinating those disturbances, because as you say, they affect buses in particular, they affect cars and so forth. So we are working with councils, working with the utility companies to reduce the amount of disruption you talk about.
Well, it's not working, is it?
Well, to give councils...
Why is it so much worse than usual at the moment? It's I think extraordinary. It's probably the only thing on which everybody listening to this programme, in the capital, I apologise if you're listening in Blackpool, this isn't going to be at the top of your list of priorities. It's probably the only thing we could all agree on, is it has never felt this. But I'm in agreement with Jeremy Clarkson on this issue.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, the consensus that this is the worst it has ever been. And it's not just utilities. Quite a lot of it is cycle lanes being built, which of course causes disruption and delay.
Well, where Blackpool residents will agree with you is also there's an issue of potholes. And so the government's also, and this is, the government's given councils additional money to address the issue of potholes, which they've got to spend by the end of the financial year. So there are a number of things culminating in the sort of distress you're demonstrating. And by the way, this is also felt by colleagues across the country as well. And that's why we need to have a system that's better coordinated. So you have just a road dug up once a year, a short period of time. The other frustration, James, is people see roads blocked off and no work being undertaken. And that's why I think if you could charge a higher lane rental, that would encourage people, incentivise them to make sure you're working all around the clock to finish that road work, because it means that you're not paying more money in lane rentals.
So we don't really know why things feel much worse than ever then at the moment. Things are much worse than ever. Just an aligning of planets. Is it a coincidence of roadworks?
90% of delays in roads are caused by roadworks. And so we've got to address the issue of roadworks, and we've got to make sure we work better with utility companies, with councils and others. This is not just another problem, I hasten to add.
Okie dokie. On with the calls.
Okay, good morning to your listeners as well. The first caller is from West London. I think it's Finlay from Ealing. Hi, Finlay.
Good morning, James and Sadiq. How are you doing?
Not bad, thank you. How are you? Okay?
Very good, thanks. My question is as follows. This week, the Tories are fighting with each other over the disastrous Rwanda policy. The Conservative candidate for mayor backs the policy, but I don't think someone who backs such an immoral, expensive and unworkable scheme is suited to the job of mayor. What do you think about the government's Rwanda policy?
Well, that's a bit of a flipping softball for the opening question. Is anybody vetting this stuff? Extraordinary. Is this because you're picking them yourself now?
Well, look, can I do with the serious issue of the Rwanda policy, which it's really important I address Finlay. And it's really important that part for a second the Rwanda policy. I'm somebody who does not believe in uncontrolled migration. I do not believe in an open doors policy. There's got to be controlled migration. We've got to also make sure we don't conflate the issue of asylum seekers, refugees, with family reunion, with students, with work permits and so forth. And my anxiety, concern and anger about the Rwanda policy, it seems to be determined and dictated by the party interest, the Conservative Party interest, and the national interest. And I just remind you and other listeners that people who are fleeing persecution, looking for a safe haven, what this Rwanda policy will mean is, even if they persuade the British government that they're a genuine refugee, they're a genuine asylum seeker, their future would be in Rwanda, not in London or in this country. And just look back at the history of our city and our country, the contribution made to our city and country by refugees and others. I think this policy is inhumane, it's immoral, and it's unworkable. But what we've seen over the last 2 weeks, though, Finlay, is a good example of a divided party, and I think they've come to the end of their time now. It's just a question of, when, not if. They're booted out. We can't be complacent about the results of the next general election, but you've got a situation where we are being deflected by this Rwanda policy, just like a few years ago we were deflected by the Brexit campaign and the Brexit policy. And I'm hoping, Finlay, cooler, calmer heads in the House of Lords prevail.
There was some astonishing polling from YouGov this week. I only saw it yesterday, looking at where the British people think immigration comes from. I don't know if you saw it. 45% of all Britons believe that more people come here illegally than legally. 34% believe that more people come here legally than illegally. I mean, it's so wrong that it is extraordinary on every level, both statistically and, I suppose, intellectually. It's about over 90% of people who come here legally. So the Rwanda policy almost seems to be designed to address this myth. Yeah,
as a consequence of misinformation. Another consequence of misinformation is people thinking wrongly that council homes goes to, inverted commas, foreigners or immigrants, or people thinking wrongly that the reasons why the NHS is struggling, the reason why schools are crumbling, the reason why there's not enough genuine affordable homes is because of the other. And by the way, it's the oldest trick in the book, James, as you know. Rather than addressing people's fears, you play on people's fears and you blame the other. In this case, the other is people who have got no safe passage to come here and are therefore having to rely upon organised criminal gangs in France and elsewhere. That's why, Phil, I think what the government should be doing is a number of things. Firstly, providing safe routes for people who are genuinely fleeing persecution to come here. Secondly, addressing the massive backlog of asylum cases by employing more caseworkers, but also targeting those criminal gangs in France and across the Mediterranean.
But politically speaking, do you understand how Rishi Sunak has ended up in such a mess on this issue? It's such a bizarre thing to have staked the house on, and yet here he is, sort of being torn apart, watching his own party tear itself to pieces over a policy that won't make much difference to anything in the unlikely event that it actually works. It's extraordinary politics.
Well, the reason why we're seeing this sort of politics is because he's weak. He's a weak man, a weak leader, a weak prime minister. That's why. So he's throwing red meat to his backbenchers, whether it's Lee Anderson or Jacob Rees-Mogg, governing in the party interest rather than the national interest. Rather than look, how does this policy address the issue of our junior doctors being on strike? How does this address the issue of the huge waiting lists in the NHS? How does this issue address our crumbling schools or the problems with getting a dentist with the cost of living crisis? And it's classic deflection. You'll remember, the polling expert, election expert used by David Cameron. He had this phrase of a dead cat. It's a good example. Look, you and I spent the last 5 minutes, because of Finlay's legitimate question, talking about Rwanda and not the other crisis facing our country. And that's what the government wants us to do.
Well, let's crack on.
Finlay, thanks for your call. The next question is from Brentwood, and it's Shane. Good morning, Shane.
Good morning, gentlemen. I work for a large housing association, and I feel the majority of staff are decent and care, but there's a deliberate and gross negligence by the directors and above. So what are you doing, or what will you do to give these tenants who are often vulnerable a voice from what I would call egregious corporate behaviour?
So Shane, I, in a previous life, was a member of Parliament, and before that was a councillor. And the advantage with those who are tenants in council properties is we had some leverage to make sure the council sorted out the sort of issues you're raising. There's a big problem in relation to the lack of locus, the lack of influence, the lack of levers with those tenants in housing associations. So what I want the government to do is to have an ombudsman with teeth looking after the interest of those in social housing, but also giving tenants like the ones you're describing powers to take action. At the moment, Shane, whether you're a local MP or a councillor, it's very difficult to exert pressure on housing associations. By the way, there are some excellent housing associations. They've had a real problem over the last 14 years because of lack of investment. They're dealing with issues around, the Grenfell Tower legacy, tall buildings, issues around the built environment and carbon emissions, but also mould and damp and so forth. And so some of them do great pieces of work. Others, you're right, aren't being held to account. And giving tenants those powers and that ally on their side would lead to, I think, housing associations that are less good raising their game.
I won't mention any names, but obviously there was a young boy who died in Rochdale.
That's right.
Because of mould. There's been another one. You mentioned the housing ombudsman. They've ruled for one housing association where the tenant suicide was down to the housing association. I know you used to be a lawyer. What about corporate manslaughter charges? Could they be?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the ombudsman currently can only exert any power when there's maladministration, not poor service and all the rest of it and stuff. So very limited powers, very little teeth. I'm afraid in this country, the law around corporate manslaughter isn't as strong as it is in, for example, in America. You will have heard other discussions over the last 3-4 weeks around the post office scandal. And steps that could have been taken against those responsible for what happened with that. I'm afraid in this country, we haven't got the powers citizens in the USA have. So we're in my legal hat. What I'd want Parliament to do is to legislate to give more rights to tenants, social tenants in particular, whether they're council tenants or housing associations. But also I want to extend those powers also to private tenants as well. I'm afraid, Shane, the issue of damp, mould, rents being increased, every few months is an issue for those who live privately as well. Generally speaking, those who are tenants in this country get a far worse service than those who are tenants across Europe and other parts of the world. I think that needs addressing.
Why is that?
I think what we saw in the 1980s was a massive deregulation of the housing market, without wishing to go back in relation to Margaret Thatcher's legacy. That deregulation meant that you had a situation where it was, a cowboy world when it came to a number of areas. You'll know, in relation to, for example, the Grenfell Tower, one of the reasons why, tenants weren't listened to, raised issues, the Resident Association, was because of lack of regulation. Councils marking their own homework, and you see that across the piece. And so I'm afraid that deregulation wasn't fully rectified when there was the last Labour government. I'm hoping the next Labour government, rectifies the massive deregulation that led to the unlevel playing field.
What percentage of former council homes do you think are now in private landlords' hands?
A significant percentage. I've got the number.
It's not a spot quiz.
No.
I couldn't believe my eyes. This is from the House of Lords Library, but it must have come up in Parliament quite recently.
It did, yeah. So I've not got the number to hand.
It's more than 40% of former council homes are now in the private rented sector. It's not quite the revolution that many fans of Margaret Thatcher still proclaim it to be, is it?
There's a figure worse than that, which is for every 6 council homes sold off, only 1 was replenished. So there's 2 things happening at the same time. One is you're reducing the amount of council housing stock, and those former council homes, subsidised by the taxpayer, are now owned by people who then sublet it, or they let it with a market value rent rather than a council rent, and the stock hasn't been replenished. That's the reason for the housing crisis, not asylum seekers or refugees or migrants and all the rest of it. What the government should be doing is addressing those issues by building significant numbers of additional council homes, by fixing the private rental market. Instead, we've got the Rwanda bill.
Thank you for what you do, Shane. It sounds like you're getting it from all angles, but obviously without people like you in that sector, the situation for vulnerable tenants would be even worse.
No, thank you, Shane.
It is already. 10:16 is the time. On with the calls.
Thank you, Shane. The next caller is from South London, and it's Sarah from Croydon. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Sadiq. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of my situation.
Please.
So mid last year, I was given a Section 21. I was evicted, and
that's a no-fault eviction notice for people who don't know. So you just got slung out of your home by the landlord.
Yeah, because he wanted to sell up.
Okay.
And I was given an emergency accommodation by the council. Now, the thing is that being in emergency accommodation, I'm now in perpetual debt and poverty. Now, the reason for this is because, number one, I don't get universal credit. Even though I'm a single parent, I don't get universal credit. My housing benefit that they said that I should pay, so the council is willing to pay only £9.98 for me. And it's £800 per month for just a room. I live with 15 other people. There are only 2 toilets and 1 bathroom. Now, I have to wait to use the bathroom. I have to wait to cook. And because I can't do that constantly, I've had to sign up to the gym. There's no broadband at the house for me to do my work, so I'm paying more for for Wi-Fi, for data. I spend lots of money on takeaway because I can't wait every single night to feed my child, who is 6 years old. And before, I had £300 to £400 left over for me to buy food and other essentials after my bill. Now, because of ULEZ and because I live so far, I'm spending that £300 and something on ULEZ. So that means every single month I'm wiped out before I even start my months. I've got, for the first time in, over 15 years, I've now got an overdraft. I'm in perpetual overdraft and debt because I can't afford to feed myself, feed my daughter, and even buy essentials. Right now, I'm waiting for payday just to buy milk. Who do I turn to if I can't get universal credit? People like me are left out of the equation because the council says to me, I earn too much. Universal credit says to me, I earn too much. But you've got ULEZ that's come and taken my money that I had to buy these things. Now I don't have anything. Who am I to go to?
Well, Sarah, thanks for your call. Can I deal with the various points you raise in the order you've raised them? So firstly, the housing issue. Secondly, benefits issue. Thirdly, ULEZ issue. So we have got a housing crisis across the country, and the irony is we're spending more money in benefits than we are in bricks and mortar. You mentioned housing benefit and so forth. So what we should be doing is spending more on bricks and mortar, which would reduce the benefits bill that you refer to. So the reason why you've got a gap between the money you receive from housing benefit and your rent is because the housing benefit has not increased with the rent for a number of years because the government froze the amount of money that those in receipt of housing benefit gets. Even though you're working, you're entitled to housing benefit because the rent is so high and your salary compared to that is low. So that's one of the reasons why we've called to the government to lift the benefit caps that exist, lift the housing benefit caps that exist to support people like you. The second issue you raised is in relation to temporary accommodation that you're in. So one of the reasons why many councils across the country are going bankrupt is because huge increases in their bills of temporary accommodation, social care and children services. And that's why we're supporting councils to buy properties already built that they can use to rehouse families rather than using temporary accommodation to reduce their bills. The third point you raise in relation to the ultra-low emission zone is I'd encourage you to, we've now increased the scrappage scheme, so anybody in London, it used to be you had to earn below a certain level, but anybody is eligible now for the scrappage scheme. 41,000 people have taken advantage of the scrappage scheme. Many have bought new vehicles. And I'd encourage you to, after this call, go to the TfL website to see what you're entitled to in relation to your car, because that will reduce the pressures there are on you. The cost of living crisis is affecting many people across the country, including in London. I'm desperately sorry for the plight you're facing. The no-fault eviction that you were at the receiving end on is causing big problems across the country. We've said to the government they should end the Section 21 no-fault eviction. They should give tenants like you longer notice periods if you are being evicted, but you should only be evicted if there's a good reason for a landlord to evict you, because what we're seeing, I'm afraid, is more and more London has been evicted through Section 21 when the government promised 3-4 years ago they would end that.
But you mentioned the the scrappage scheme. If for the scrappage scheme they only give you £2,000, £2,000 is not going to buy me a ULEZ car.
ULEZ compliant. So with respect, it does.
I'm already paying. I've still got £3,000 left on the card that I have.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I can't get a new car because I can't afford it.
Yeah. So just I say in a respectful way, you can get a ULEZ compliant car for the amount of money available in the scrappage scheme. I know this because many people have, but also we speak to those who show cars for sale. For those who've got finance, I mean, I'm afraid you need to speak to your finance company because different finance companies have different rules in relation to paying back the finance. What some people have chosen to do is to sell their vehicle because they get more money from that than they do from the scrappage scheme. But you can contact TfL, who will give you advice in relation to the scrappage scheme and the eligibility. And just to reassure you that there are vehicles available that are ULEZ compliant with the money the scrappage scheme gives.
But can I also ask, why is it that the government and the councils waste money on housing people in temporary accommodation, especially people who can probably afford a mortgage but just don't have a deposit? Why waste money on temporary accommodation for certain people? Why is it not means tested? Maybe it's better for the council to give certain people deposits knowing that they can get a mortgage.
Yeah, so,
and then they no longer become the council's problem.
I agree with you. That's one of the reasons why I explained that the irony in relation to the benefits bill versus bricks and mortar. So there is a scheme which we do and which others do called the shared ownership scheme, which is part mortgage, part rent. So your deposit required is far less than it otherwise would be. So the normal deposit you need in London is circa £30,000-40,000, which very few people have, even if it's 5%. With shared ownership, the mortgage is far less. The average is £5,000, and now some mortgage companies are offering mortgages with a smaller deposit. You'll have heard, I'm sure, Rachel Reeves last week talking about fixed-term mortgages for 25 years to give people certainty, as they do in Europe, and that's one of the things that would help people like you, Sarah. But the irony is now the average cost to rent in London is £2,500. So if you were able to get on the property ladder, your mortgage, even with the increases caused by Liz Truss's kamikaze budget, would probably be less than the rent you pay in London and with a private landlord.
So what are we advising Sarah to do then in the context of all of the problems?
In relation to housing, Sarah, I mean, the key thing is to obviously speak to the council and see what help they can give you. Also, what we've done is we've provided financial support to CABs and to law centres. So it's worth just checking, Sarah, whether through a CAB and law centre that we help fund, whether you can maximise your income, because there may be benefits you're entitled to which you aren't receiving. Over the last couple of years, we've given lots of families in London additional income because of benefits they're entitled to they're not receiving. And the third thing, James, is to encourage Sarah to go to the TFL website to assist her, because what I don't want is her having to pay the ULEZ charge when she simply can't afford to do so.
So even if you ended up still owing money on the old car, you would be able to drive a car that didn't involve the ULEZ charge every day. That's what we're
So what happens? So what people have done in London, and those just outside London, is to sell off their vehicle, pay back their finance company, and then they're not getting future, £12, £50 a day, which is the ULEZ charge, or use a scrappage scheme, and with the money from the scrappage scheme, buy another vehicle that is ULEZ compliant. Some people haven't bought another vehicle; they've decided to.
It may not touch the sides of what you're going through at the moment, Sarah, but quite a lot of people getting in touch to say, Andrew in Richmond, but my 18-year-old car is worth next to nothing, but it is ULEZ compliant. I mean, quite a lot of people have been surprised to discover that their cars were not, particularly people in Uxbridge and
so just to remind colleagues that generally speaking, a petrol car that's newer than 2005 is ULEZ compliant. A diesel car that's newer than 2015 is ULEZ compliant. People think they've got to buy an electric car or a hybrid car or a new car. That's not the case.
Sarah, I wish we could do more.
Well, the thing is that I know he said about the shared ownership, but if I'm in perpetual debt, how am I supposed to save for a deposit for that? That's my thing. If I'm not getting extra money from elsewhere, how am I supposed to get myself out of this? Who am I supposed to go to? There's no government website that tells me that you can go to this if you've been denied universal credit. There's nothing like that.
Sarah, I mean, I'd encourage you to go to the Citizens Advice Bureau and law centres because we know they're desperately overworked and understaffed. We've given them resources over the last couple of years, and I announced in my budget this week we'll be giving those law centres an additional £4.2 million because they can help people who are really struggling, but also they can advise them and they can signpost them to schemes and funding available to them, because you're right, it's a minefield in relation to seeing what benefits you're entitled to. I think the reality is for in the short term, it's very difficult to support people because of the lack of council homes. One of the reasons why I'm really passionate about council homes and genuinely affordable homes is because it allows people like you who aspire to be a homeowner to pay sub-market rents, so you can put money aside to save up for a deposit in the future, because you're living hand to mouth, because you've been paying a private rent, temporary accommodation. You simply can't put money aside each month to pay for a deposit. That's one of the reasons why actually council homes actually is a stepping stone towards the aspiration many people have to be homeowners.
So I wish you well. We'll keep in touch. You let us know how you get on with some of the organisations that the Mayor has suggested that you speak to, but do hang in there. Time for at least one more call.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your call, and best of luck in the future. The next caller is from Tower Hill, and it's Alex. Good morning, Alex.
Hello, hi Sadiq. Hi, I run an organisation called Reform Political Advertising. Yep. We're a politically neutral, not-for-profit organisation campaigning for the House of Lords recommendation for there to be regulation for factual claims in electoral ads. And we launched a code for factual accuracy in electoral advertising this week. And I just wanted to ask you a straight yes or no question about it. The key point in the pledge that we're approaching parties and candidates in the mayoral election to support is that in your election advertising this year, you're going to make every reasonable effort not to mislead voters, ensure that factual claims are accurate according to recognised sources, and acknowledge if you make a mistake and issue a public correction as quickly as possible. The Green parties have already signed up to this. Will you sign up to it too?
This is Alex Tate, who was in the studio on Wednesday from Reform Political Advertising with a pretty straightforward question.
Well, Alex, I'm sure I'll ask my election agent to speak to you to see what we can do in relation to that. Can you go back in time to 2016 during the Brexit campaign? Because that bus was a lie, wasn't it?
Well, actually, there's disinformation across all of our elections. We've been tracking them, and we tracked the last mayoral election. It was particularly dirty, like we saw Sean Bailey sending, fake letters with a made-up City Hall logo for Londoners, and Brian Rose's antics. So it's a real opportunity
Alex,
to take some leadership.
Important. Of course, I'm sympathetic. I've been at the receiving end, as you know, James knows, in elections, and you've just given another example of that. So, of course, I'm sympathetic to this. I probably get massive resignations from my election agent if I suggest on air, but of course, we're sympathetic, and I'll make sure that my team speaks to you to make sure we can sign up to this. I mean, my only anxiety, just speaking candidly with you, is, as I've always been straight in relation to not just my election literature, but also as mayor in relation to what we are doing. We've got to have a level playing field, Alex, because what would be unfair is if I continue to be straight, candid and honest with Londoners, but my Tory opponent or others weren't. And so, of course, it's got to be right what you're saying. We've seen the consequence. James gave one example in relation to people's views on immigration, of misinformation. So, of course, we can have, factually accurate information. And by the way, sometimes we can make an error. Put your hands up and accept that an error has been made and correct that. And so, of course, I'm sympathetic, Alex. I'm going to encourage my election agent to speak to you as soon as this call is finished.
I'm going to keep an eye on this as well, because I don't quite buy that response. The idea that you can't commit to being honest in case.
I've said I'm sympathetic. No, I've said I'm sympathetic.
What you also said was you can't commit to it because the other lot might carry on lying. But two wrongs are never going to make a right, are they?
Hold on a sec, Alex. We've got to recognise that that the last two mayoral campaigns have seen the Tories fight dirty.
Yes.
Misinformation, lies, and some would say racist and Islamophobic. Now, listen, I'm somebody who always has tried to fight campaigns that are Marquis of Queensberry, where my opponents, use Fight Club rules. What I'm saying to Alex is, of course, I'm sympathetic to what you're talking about. Of course, I try and have high standards. Of course, I try and have altitude. But I'm signposting Alex to my election agent in relation to pledges that have been signed up, because what happens is, you'll be aware, James, there'll be callers after callers between now and May the 2nd asking me to sign up to things. So yes, Alex, I'm sympathetic. And thank you, by the way, for the public service you're providing. And so I'll make sure my election agent speaks to you as soon as we finish this call.
And we will stay in touch with Alex and make sure that he does get a full and frank response. I think the Conservative candidate's on Monday, Alex. I don't know whether you'll be able to get on and perhaps put the same question to her, but she's on with Nick Ferrari on Monday morning.
Yeah. We ran it at the... So we asked a similar question to candidates of the last mayoral election. I think maybe we're a bit late with Sadiq, but the Liberal Democrats and the Greens signed up to it, as well as 7 candidates in total. We'll definitely speak to you.
No, thanks, Alex. And thank you.
Londoners would be quite disappointed if you can't commit to be factually accurate in your election ads. It's a very simple ask.
Yeah, no, thanks, Alex. And I'll make sure that my election agent speaks to you when we finish this call. I've only got time for another caller, haven't we?
One more.
Yeah, so the next caller is from... thanks, Alex. The next caller is from Loughton, and it's Tony. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for taking my call. I've been a London cabbie now for 44 years, proud and distinguished, as you appreciate. I'm glad you mentioned the word high standards in your last comment. It comes to light this week that you was supporting a rally of non-speaking requirements for minicabs to be endorsed into the minicab industry, whether it's Uber or minicabs in general. Now, I want to know why, with respect to you, sir, is the fact that why have you done this? Fundamentally, it's the most important thing, language, from driver to passenger, to go from A to B. And you've now just, a stroke of a pen, suggested the £36 on the Cyril situation is going to be abolished. Now, with respect to you, sir, why have you done this? Because if anyone gets into a minicab and they want to go to, say, even Westminster Abbey, the driver might not even understand how to get there, let alone to speak English. Now, how can you make that decision, sir?
Well, Tony, thanks for your call. Firstly, I've made no decision. What TfL are doing is reviewing the way they test people's competence to speak English, because what we've had examples of, TfL have, is examples of where people do speak very good English, but are not very good at doing tests. So what TfL are doing, and I support TfL, is reviewing the method of testing people to make sure it's fair. I'm sure you'd support that.
Listen, I mean, I understand the situation more than anyone else, being a London cabbie at the forefront for 44 years and seeing the political agenda that's gone on and the demise of the London black cab with the phasing out of the old TFX in them type of cabs. And then we've lost 3,000 drivers. And the situation now, you've took 3 years off a London cab that they shouldn't have been took off. And all these people now have gone from early retirement and when COVID was in.
What's the question, Tony, mate?
Well, it leads on to another question.
Well, no, we haven't got time for another question. What's the answer to the Seru English? No, I'm asking the Mayor. So he says you've abolished the test. Has it been abolished?
No, TfL haven't abolished the test. TfL are reviewing the method of testing people's competence because people can speak great English, Tony being a good example, and others, may not be good at doing tests. And so what TfL are doing is reviewing the way people are tested and their English and so forth.
So does that reassure you, Tony?
Mr. Mayor, is the £7,500...
No, just on the question that you've rung in on, does that address your question?
Well, it doesn't with respect to you, James.
So you think the Mayor is misleading me now?
It might be a vote winner. That's all I'm trying to say.
I don't understand. I really want to help you out here because I don't understand. You've said it's been abolished. He says it hasn't been.
It hasn't. Well, all right. Well, in time will tell. Time will tell.
All right. Yeah. Well, mind how you go. 10:36 is the time, and that's that. I think for another month. Well, what about the bridge in Hammersmith? I bloody hate motoring questions. I really do. But the bridge in Hammersmith is going to cost 250 million quid now. I saw a Tory councillor suggesting it should be named after you.
By the way, the cost of repairing Hammersmith Bridge is not new. So Hammersmith Bridge is a bridge owned by the council, Hampstead and Fulham. We know it's been closed to vehicles for a number of years. H&F have said quite clearly they can't afford to pay for the bridge to be repaired to a standard that allows vehicles to go over like buses. TfL don't own the asset and haven't got that sort of money either. The government are the only people that can afford to pay for the cost of that bill being repaired. Before the last mayoral election, the government said they would pay for that bridge to be repaired if the Tory won. The Tory didn't win, so they've withdrawn the offer to pay for that bridge being repaired. It's a classic example of a political stunt and the government withholding cash for that bridge because the council is Labour and the mayor is Labour. I'd ask them to stop playing games with the residents in and around Hammersmith Bridge. Many of them desperately need to get across that bridge. We want buses to go across that bridge. And, the sooner they agree to pay for the cost of the bridge being repaired, the better. And
finally, an attack on a ULEZ camera and a set of traffic lights led to a child being injured in a car accident, police have said.
Yeah, look, I was notified about this yesterday. Can I be quite clear in relation to this issue? Look, the decision to expand the ULEZ was a difficult one for me to take, but it's the right one for me to make. I understand, though, there are people who oppose my policy of expanding the ULEZ. I think it's legitimate to protest, but the way to protest should be lawful, peaceful and safe. This is just one example of the consequences of those who are against the ULEZ breaking the law, because we've got a situation where a child has been injured as a consequence of actions from those who are anti-ULEZ. I'd encourage them to protest in a way that's lawful, peaceful and safe, because what we don't want is, God forbid, an injury that's even more serious.
Well, this has been directly linked by police to the destruction of.
Well, we had a few weeks ago.
What do you say to Ian Duncan-Smith, who said he was happy for people to sabotage these cameras because they are, in his own words, facing an imposition that no one wants?
Well, I think for people like him to justify and explain the use of an improvised explosive device used last month to explain to this child and their family the consequence of their actions. And by the way, many of us rightly criticise when those who feel passionately about the environment, like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, break the law. There should be some consistency. And I'd hope Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith and those others who support these sorts of law breaking would also be consistent in relation to criticising, condemning and asking these people to stop this sort of law breaking.
Many thanks.
Pleasure always.
It is just coming up to 22:11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watt's up next with your headlines.
The Prime Minister has insisted the government is absolutely committed to British steelmaking. Tata is expected to confirm the closure of blast furnaces at Port Talbot, threatening more than 3,000 jobs. A newborn baby is being cared for in hospital after she was found in a shopping bag in East London. Police are trying to trace the girl's mother, who they say will be in need of immediate medical attention. The UK's retail industry declined at its fastest rate in nearly 3 years last month. Sales volumes dropped by 3.2% in December as shoppers cut back in the run-up to Christmas. LBC weather, cold and dry with sunny spells for most places, a bit more snow across Scotland, a high